Welcome to the MESH Guides on Research Methods. My name is Professor Sarah Uni, and today I'm joined with the author of the MESH Guides, which is Eira Patterson, and I'm also joined by Richard Proctor, and we all work on the MESH Guides project. Eira is very kindly going to talk now about her Research Methods Guides. Eira.
Thank you. It's great to have this opportunity to be able to talk about the Research Methods Guides, because we're all very passionate about supporting people who are working in schools to get them engaged in research, engaged in looking at evidence, and to move on to doing your own research. So I'm really glad to have this chance to chat through these guides for you today. So if I just give you a quick overview of what the guides are aiming to do, the first thing that they will help you with is to actually engage with evidence that is published. So basically within the realm of literature that's already existing, one of the guides is designed to actually support you in actually reading literature in an informed way, finding literature that's relevant to you, and then supporting you in actually moving forward within your education context, so that you can disseminate that literature in a way that helps other members of staff to actually move forward in their practice as well. So that's one of the things. The other aim of the guides is to help you to become research active yourselves. So it's really that they would act as a catalyst that would empower you and to enable you to become some kind of agent of change in your school context, and even beyond that if you're working in a federated structure or a hub. So it's to support you in actually maybe identifying challenges, barriers to learning, to support you in problem solving, and also to help you to find innovative new ways of approaching your own practice and supporting others in your school. And then my kind of long-term aim that I'm quite keen on doing, I'm not sure exactly how this will work at the moment, but it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time, is to support members of staff in schools in becoming members of communities of practice, you know, so that you can share your research with others, that you can get ideas from others, that you can find out how to perhaps approach research in different ways, because a lot of the research data that we gather from schools is quite small scale. But once we start combining that together, we really become empowered in sort of seeing what trends there might be and how we can kind of get the bigger picture. So I'm quite keen that these guides would be used to perhaps support these collaborations, and where you can talk to others and co-construct knowledge together in a structured and scaffolded way. So that's the overarching aim of the guides. Mm-hmm. So for this next part, what I thought I'd do is just give you a very brief overview of each of the guides. So if I share my screen with you, you'll be able to see. Okay, so the first guide that I'm going to just give you an insight into is one on ethics. Okay, so in order to engage in research-informed practice, it's very important that we consider the ethics of the research that we're going to carry out. In order to be able to understand ethics, there are a few underpinning principles that are very important, and what this guide actually does is it gives you, so you can see here in this first column, it sort of gives you what these underpinning principles are, just to give you an insight into that so you understand them. So it's things like, for example, how you might gain informed consent. So if you're going to work with children in your school, how do you get informed consent from the parents? How do you ensure that all the things that you do are to the highest possible ethical standards? One underpinning theme of ethics is this idea, a bit like medicine, of doing no harm. But I think there's an even bigger idea that we could consider as well, as how can ethics ensure that we do some good? So how can we move our practice forward so that we're actually going to make a difference in the lives of the students that we're working with? Some other themes that you might want to consider are, how do you ensure that the people, the participants that you work with, whether it be members of staff, students, children, how do you ensure anonymity, confidentiality, and also this new theme that's coming relatively recently of GDPR compliance. So how do you ensure that your research meets all these underpinning ethical criteria? And one thing that you might want to consider as well is how can you engage with participant voice. So it's quite important that participants are enabled to talk to you in an open way so that they understand what's going on, but they can sort of share their voice and tell you what they really think. And also that while you're going through this process, that you empower them through the process. Now, some of the themes here, so you can see the ethics in practice, the middle column, is talking about, how you would turn some of these principles that I've been just talking about into practice. So when you click on some of these links, so it just shows how it works. So it's not very easy to see on this screen, but you can see each of the links that you click on is live, and then it'll take you through to a section in the MESH guide, and then it gives you some ideas and examples so that you understand, what this might look like when you're trying to turn it into practice. There is a section as well on practical challenges, and when you are aiming to engage with the ethics in your research and to get these high standards of ethics, there are some things that you'll find are tricky and not as easy as perhaps you would like, but life's a bit like that. So it's really good that we can, I think with COVID, that we've learned how to overcome challenges. So it's just a bit more along those lines. So if we can overcome practical challenges with ethics, that's brilliant. And this is just some ideas for actually how to enable you to do that. Okay, so that's the ethics mesh guide. So the next mesh guide that I would like to take you on to is this one. It's doing a literature review. So before you actually start thinking about designing your own research project, it's really good for you to engage in depth with the literature that exists. So to really get an idea of what's already out there, because that helps you to raise some really intelligent and useful questions, and also gives you insights into what you might try out in your own practice. So what this mesh guide is designed to do is, so first of all, it helps you. So can you see in this middle column, it helps you to actually do searching in an organized way. So one element of doing searching is this identifying of key terms. I'll not click on these because it takes us through to different pages, but you can try that yourselves. So I'll just tell you some of the things that are in there. So how do you know what to look for? Well, identifying key terms is the way you start with that. Then you can carry on to your electronic searches. Now, in order to do electronic searches, there are some tricks that can help you to do that more effectively, and some strategies and approaches you can use. So this mesh guide gives you a little bit of insight into those, and it tells you a little bit about how to get started with various search engines. Now, when you've started looking for literature, you can be quite overwhelmed and find that there is so much stuff there you don't quite know what to do with it all. So one of the keys that you need is to actually begin to organize your information, and this mesh guide helps you to select the literature that is relevant to you, and also the literature that actually has the most credibility and is actually supported by some credible evidence. So it's important that you're able to evaluate your literature. So the mesh guide will also help you to do that and see, actually, is this believable? Is this something that we really want to use to actually inform our practice? So it's very important to be selective about that. Here's the section on helping you how to find information in the texts. And also, it's really important that you start to think about what questions do you want to ask when you start to read the literature. What are the questions that this literature is prompting you to ask and think about? Now, this is just an idea that I came up with when I was writing an article some time ago, is this idea of when you've got all your literature and all your ideas, you need to tell a story. Now, it's not a fictional story, it's a factual story. I don't know if that's a bit of a two ideas going in different directions, but you're trying to tell a story, and think of looking for literature, looking for themes that you're then going to tell to your colleagues. You need to tell them a convincing story that's going to really encourage them, motivate them, inspire them, because in order for anything that you find out to make a difference, it's essential that you actually can support it with evidence, and that you can tell it in a way that other people are going to come on board with and think that this is a really good way forward. So you can analyze the themes from the things that you read. You can begin to structure your ideas, and there's a suggestion here for how you can create maps to help you to do that. And then once you've structured your ideas, you're kind of telling a story that is a logical progression of ideas. Now, in this bit as well, there's also the idea of taking those ideas that you have found from the literature and then starting to think about, so what does this mean for my practice, and am I thinking of new ideas that this is spurring me on to think of different things beyond the literature. So you're really critically analysing that literature and synthesising new things from it. Okay, and then there's a little case study here about the trouble in the story. So this is the idea of finding a story that is the answer to some sort of problem or some sort of challenge, because I think the best sort of stories that we read, which are the fictional stories, have some sort of plot in them, don't they, where there's a problem to solve. And I think it's the same with us in when we're looking at education and educational research. The most effective way we can engage with literature is when we find something that is a problem or an issue that we really want to solve and make a difference in learners' lives. So that's that for the literature review. Okay, and the final guide that I would like us to look at is going beyond the literature now into looking at doing your own research. So this is where you're not just looking at other people's research anymore, but you're starting to open up in your education context, take this research that you have found and start to ask questions that you want to then explore and gather data for in your own education context. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview about how this is quite a big MESH guide, and there's quite a lot here. So I'm not suggesting that you would read all the sections. What you might want to do is just dip into it and find things that are relevant to you, at least to start with. One of the main things that this guide is designed to do is help you to just start on a research journey. And this little section here gives you some ideas about that and how to think about research. There's a little bit on terminology, just so you can get into the ideas about qualitative and quantitative data. A lot of the research that's done in education contexts looks at qualitative data, you know, the sort of data where you're not worried too much about big numbers, but you're looking at, you know, really rich data, the things that the participants can tell you about the context that you're in, the information about the context to really enrich what you're trying to find out about. So this deep and rich data. You can also do quantitative research as well, and a future development of this MESH guide will be to actually enable that to take place a little bit more. It just touches on it at the moment. It's looking mostly at present at qualitative research. Now, in this section, this is looking, and don't worry too much about the terms, but this idea of factors and variables. Now, variables are terms that are used often in quantitative research, where they're the things that in a context that you're working in, the things that make a difference to the thing that you're studying. They're all the different things that are happening, the different parts of the situation, maybe different, you know, things that influence maybe that question that you're interested in exploring. Within qualitative research, there's a lot of debate about this, but I've just decided to call them factors. So within qualitative research, these are the things that are happening in your context that you might want to find out about. So I'm going to give one example. So if we were thinking about children's resilience, because that's quite a big topic at the minute, and lots of people are interested in researching resilience and what affects that. So say we were looking at resilience in problem solving in mathematics, you might think about, so that's my focus, that's what I'm really interested in exploring. So what possible factors could be influencing children's resilience in problem solving in mathematics? Well, for example, it could be the ethos in the classroom, you know, how teachers respond to children when they actually struggle with mathematics or they get things wrong, you know, what's the response? there might be what's the approach to using concrete resources? Is that advocated? Is that suggested? Does that what happens when children struggle with a mathematical problem? So there's these sorts of things. There's also maybe the way that children have been taught to explore mathematical problems. So these are just all ideas. Can you see they're the sorts of things that may impact on the way that children may exhibit resilience? Now, I'll come back to that word resilience in a minute. Okay, so this is the idea then, that we're going to try to think about some sort of question. I'm going to miss out the middle column for a minute, and I'm just going to jump to this column that's one from the end on the right. So this is a column that tells you a little bit about how to develop your own research design. And this is the one that I think is probably most relevant to everybody. Yeah? Other bits you can dip in and out of, but in order to develop your own research design, there are a series of stages that you go through. And the first stage is to identify your focus. So we've already talked about a focus of resilience, so we'll just keep with that for a minute. In order to explore resilience, we would need to actually ask some questions about it. So we need to think of some questions that we want to ask. And literature is a brilliant way to start doing that. Read the literature that exists, and that really helps you to think of questions. Also, look at your context that you're in. Look at what the children are doing. Ask, just informally what the staff think about things, and that helps you to think of questions as well. Then you've got an overarching question, and then you've got some sub-questions. Now, going back to this theme of resilience, don't be worried about this term. I can hardly say it usually, so I'm going to have a little try now. Operationalisation. I quite liked it though, so I thought I'd just pick that one up. I picked it up from some literature, and I think it's quite a nice idea. All it means is when you've got an idea, a complicated construct, like for example, if you've got an easy thing to measure, like you want to measure how fast children are growing in height, it's fairly easy. You get a tape measure, and periodically you would stop and measure them. That's not a problem. When you want to start to research something like resilience or creativity, which is a complex construct, now you start to think about it's really tricky. How do you know if a child is being resilient, or how do you know if a child's being creative? This is where it becomes a little bit trickier to actually explore these things in research. So what this section does is it tells you how to see or how to begin to see those things. So for example, I would be looking for indicators of resilience. So if a child was sitting down doing a problem, they may, if a child's resilient, I would expect them, when they overcome difficulties, that they wouldn't give up easily, that they would continue to try. They may even look for different ways of doing things. So can you see, these are suggestions of things you might start to look at in order to see the actual thing, that the construct that you're trying to investigate. Now, I saw a really interesting, it was my daughter's, one of her magazines that she has. It was really interesting, and it's related to this. I can cut this bit out later if it's a bit boring, but I'll tell you anyway because it's quite interesting. When astronomers now are looking at different planets and stars and things, they look with telescopes that look at different wavelengths of light. So basically, looking at the infrared or the visible light or the ultraviolet. And when they actually look and take pictures through these different lenses that they use and these different telescopes that they use, they actually get hugely different ways of, images and hugely different ways of seeing the planets or the stars. And this is the same way with us. When we're operationalizing a construct, when we operationalize it in different ways, we will see it in a different way. So it's really important that we sort of visualize it carefully and think about, how are we going to see this thing that we're looking at? Okay, that's enough on that. So if we jump back then to this middle column, don't worry too much about these, but this is about the research methodology, and there are different types of research methodology. And one thing that you might think about doing is a case study, for example, where you're looking in depth at a particular thing within your school context. Very popular thing in education research is action research, where you go to the literature maybe and find out something that researchers have tried in another context and found has worked with children. You then bring it into your context, you try it out and you evaluate its effectiveness, and then maybe kind of modify it and then try it again, see if you can enhance it and make it work for you. So that's basically a very quick overview of action research. So there are other things there that you can look at. And then very last of all, on the last column, is this section about developing your research tools. Now, these are the actual things, just like a carpenter uses tools to actually do something with a piece of wood, you need tools to actually do something, to find the evidence in your context, to give you insights, to give you data, to actually help you to understand your context, or to understand the question that you're asking within that context a little bit more. So these are the different tools, the questionnaires, or also surveys. This is a bit contentious about what you call them, but basically it's the same thing. It's a list of questions that you give to people to answer, and this section gives you some ideas about different types of questions that you may ask. Interviews, where you sit and discuss with people, and what you're trying to do in an interview is facilitate and enable the participants to tell you what they really think is important, and that's really skilled but a very interesting and powerful tool. So you would create interview schedule perhaps to help you to do that. Observations, where you would maybe have an observation checklist or something, to sort of help you to focus your observations. It could be quite a detailed one, or it could be just a loose one to give you some ideas of things to look at, but there are suggestions in that section to help you. Document analysis, where you might look at certain documents within your school context, or maybe other documents that are government publications that you'd analyse these. This is a very interesting and new one, which I'm going to develop a bit more, about the use of visual images in research, and that's a very powerful tool. For example, there's some research being done where children go around the school context that they're in and take pictures, take photographs, and then they've got something to talk to you about and share with you. And remember, we talked earlier within the ethics section about empowering. This is really a good way to empower children, because you're giving them a tool where they're in control of the images they collect, and then you've empowered them within the discussions that they're going to have with you. Deciding on the type of data you will collect, this is a little section on that, and basically that depends on the questions that you're asking, and the way that you word the questions can have a big impact on the data that you collect. And I think having someone to help you with that when you start off can be a good thing, just to sort of how you frame those questions. But this mesh guide definitely gives you some insights into that, and how the wording is important, and how changing the wording can change the way that you carry out your research. And then very last of all, how do you decide on the sample? And the sample basically is the participants that you would like to invite to become involved in your research with, and tell you about their insights and share with you their experiences. Okay, so I think that's my overview done.
Thank you. Can we have a discussion now, Eira? Is
Yes,
it possible
certainly.
to keep the guide up?
Yes. Would you like that last guide up again?
Yes.
Okay.
And apologies, I'm not sure if I can hear echoing.
Okay.
Great, Eira. So two questions, or two things for us to talk about. If we scroll down.
Yeah.
Is when we talk about action research, we can also talk about participatory action research, sometimes referred to as PAR, and sometimes you'll read that in conjunction with ideas around co-construction of research. And I'm very interested in how that's also along the same row as using visual images in research. And I was thinking that when it comes to participatory action research, we think it's very important that participants are actively involved in the research process.
Yes.
So they're part of it, so that they are not done to, but instead are helping to both collect the data and be part of that research process in an active way, which is why I think it's really important that we talk about student voice and participatory voice.
Yes.
Because the participants might actually be teachers in your own department or in another school, and it's about how we empower them as well, isn't it, in that process?
Yes, and also I've come across some research as well where children are actually involved in designing the research. So obviously it has to be scaffolded, because you can't expect children to understand the whole structure of the research process, but when it's a scaffolded process, they can actually help to make decisions within that process and decide on different ways. So, I mean, giving them a range of options of perhaps how the data might be collected, or maybe even some of the questions that might be asked, I think such a powerful tool, because they have ideas that perhaps they would like to explore. It's a bit into constructivism in science education, where you really empower children to raise their own questions. And I think when they're engaged and motivated in the research process in that way, you're going to get far more powerful data from it and insights.
Thank you. That's really helpful for us to understand participatory action research, as I said, sometimes called PAR. The other thing I wanted to talk about, particularly for anybody who's listening who may be undertaking either a master's program or a PGCE level 7 assessment, is the notion of research paradigms. So if we scroll back up, it's really important to see here in the structure where we sit with research paradigms, because what's great about this is that we've got research tools at the very end. And I like your metaphor of the carpenter. This is where, you know, does the carpenter use the saw or the tape measure or the plane? Because actually when we're building, you know, a chest of drawers or a table, we know what the outcome is, but there's different ways of creating it, isn't it?
Yes.
So they're the actual tools, but we've also got research design, and that's about, are we going to undertake a case study? Are we doing experimental, quasi-experimental pre and post test approach? Are we going to undertake participatory action research? But above that is that whole notion of research paradigm around whether or not it's positivistic, / scientific, or if it's going to be more interpretivist and take a more qualitative approach. So I just wondered if you wanted to say anything about research paradigms in relation to your guide.
Yes, this touches a little bit on them. It's an area that I will develop, I think, a little bit more in the future. Now, if we take a step back a little bit, this is quite interesting. Now, when you meet researchers and you meet people who write research methods books, it's quite interesting because people are often very determined and very definite about the way that you should collect data. And this all stems back to what you believe about what evidence and what truth is actually important and what is believable and what isn't. And so if you are quite positivist and you believe in, you know, a kind of experimental approaches and collecting lots of data, and it's you would then move down the path of collecting survey data maybe, and have to have big numbers. Now there's lots of in medicine, this is quite interesting, there's lots of quantitative research being carried out in the past, you know, with massive studies. And it's very interesting that in the realm of medicine now, researchers seem to be moving towards a more qualitative approach in lots of cases, because what they were finding was they were gathering loads and loads of evidence, and it was giving them insights into, if I do this, then that happens. But somehow they were missing out the actual student and the experience of the patient. So the patient experience was missed out in the middle. So this is almost like that idea, Sarah, that you were just mentioning about the being done to. So all these patients are having stuff done to them, but nobody knew why. For example, if in a trial, you know, people weren't taking particular tablets, you know, it wasn't carrying on particularly well, nobody knew why. So they realised that it's actually much more powerful if you talk to the patients and ask for their views on things. So it's quite interesting. So there's actually a shift at the minute in medical research away from just collecting large amounts of data and this quantitative approach to a qualitative approach where you start to talk to people and gain insights. So can you see there's this idea of, so if you look at the research literature, there's this idea of ontology. So the ontology bit is the nature of truth and what you believe is actually really true and what matters with regard to knowledge. And then that impacts on this other big word that is epistemology. So in other words, that impacts on what you then do to actually find stuff out. So if you believe that only large amounts of data collected, you know, from these randomized controlled trials actually matter, that then impacts on the way you will collect your data. So actually these things are quite important. Don't be worried or put off by them though, because these things develop and emerge as you go on. but it's quite important to sort of have a view that these do exist. There's a little bit in the guide about it, so but I will enhance that. And I think perhaps, Sarah, a good thing to do with that would be perhaps just a quick talk, perhaps, I don't know if we can link to videos within the guides.
Oh,
so it would be less, perhaps, dare I say, less boring than reading like a large amount of text about ontology and epistemology.
Yes. We warmly welcome moving to a more multimodal, multimedia approach. So for these boxes, if you want to link to any relevant videos or podcasts or anything, it's absolutely fine. The other thing I was going to say was, because epistemology and ontology does underpin the different paradigms, and we have, on the one continuum, science, which is all about objective understanding of reality and that it can be objectively measured, and social science, which is much more interpretivist and based on qualitative work around, well, it's about the meanings that we bring to understand reality. We've also got this middle ground, haven't we, which is what you've been talking about, which is the pragmatic paradigm. And that pragmatic paradigm is moving to that mixed methods approach. And I think that's also really helpful, isn't it, when we want to get research data that may be able to speak more in depth around meaning, but also at the same time have the quantitative work to give us the patterns, so we know why we're looking at something in particular and want to explain a pattern. Yes,
so you're getting insights from different views. Now, some people are quite concerned about doing that and mixing methods together and bringing things from different paradigms. But there does seem to be a shift now in the literature towards that, where people are willing to kind of engage with different types of data, because in the end, if it gives you more insights that are useful to moving practice forward, then it can't be a bad thing, I don't think.
Absolutely. That's great, Eira. Eira, is there anything else that you haven't said that you want to say about this guide?
I think the main thing is not to be frightened, just to get started and try things out. I do think it's important to have some sort of structure and support there to help you, though, and to just check the ethics and how you're going to manage that, and to have the leadership team in your school, if it's a school context that you're working in, or a college, and just try and think about how you might manage that. And obviously, if you can link to the higher education institution as well to support you in that in some way, that's great. And if people did want any help or ideas or support, I'm quite happy if they drop me an email, just to help them get started, because I'm really keen to see research move forward in schools. Because I work on the MA at Winchester, and I've seen the power of research and what it can do in schools, and how it can help move practice forward. So I'm very keen to help people get started on that journey.
And perhaps we could have a forum, Eira, where we can have the opportunity for people that are conducting research across the country to have that opportunity to share and resources and knowledge and experiences.
I think that would be brilliant. I've had that idea in the back of my mind for some time. It's how to sort of build that in and structure it and get something that kind of scaffolds it, so it can sit in, and how to make it accessible as well, so that people see its relevance. I think that's the trick, isn't it, to try and get it so it's in a structure that's usable, that's accessible, and that is relevant to people.
Yes,